Hi there, and welcome to Zoodio, brought to you by Tazoo, a global customer experience consultancy focused on creating and delivering digital experiences. At Zoodio, we promise you interesting conversations about customer experience, digital experience, user experience, design, and technology, uniting to build better moments for organizations around the world. Today, we're joined by Michele Lamorte, a taxonomist by trade, working as a senior DAM consultant for Tazoo. Today's conversation was super interesting for me. As a UX designer, I've studied a little bit of taxonomy, but a lot of it goes over my head. So I learned so much today about how information is structured and organized and how a taxonomist does what a taxonomist does. I hope you enjoy. Hi there, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us today. For a little background on you, so you've been working in the large data industry for about 15 years now. Is that right?
Unfortunately, that is correct.
That's fortunate. That's lots of experience. It's very good. I was looking, I was stalking you on LinkedIn, as one does, as I learned from Christine to do. And I noticed that you have a lot of schooling, including you studied food studies at NYU. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What led to that?
Yeah, so I had my library degree in 2008, and to be an academic librarian, you typically need 2 master's degrees. It can be in any subject. It doesn't necessarily have to be the subject that you do at the university you work at. So when I worked at NYU, I started attending the grad program for food studies, which is something I'm still interested in. I do food research now.
What do you do on the side with it?
Oh, well, I am really interested in data, which we will actually talk about my position here. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people kind of still don't really know how to find information, or to find the right information, or to find the type of information that makes sense for what they're looking for. And so a lot of the things that I look into and kind of write about and talk about are food data online, food resources. So online thesauri, online taxonomies, different government websites where you can get food information, so that nobody has to reinvent the wheel every time they need to do research on food.
What kind of research on food are we talking? Are we talking nutritional information or farming industry stuff?
All of the above. The one thing that kind of got me started within the past 5 years or so in studying this in particular is that a person in a listserv that I'm on asked the question if there was a list of international cuisine. And so that thread had over 50 replies, which is amazing because everyone has their own idea of what cuisine is. Every culture, every country, every state, every town might think of cuisine as something different. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, one of the things that I try and talk to people about are using resources that exist to either utilize that resource or combine a bunch of resources to create a subset of information that they could use to create whatever they need to create. So say the international cuisine question, right? Mm-hmm. There's a resource that I talk about a lot. It's called Bar Talk. It's an international kind of collaboration of resources. So you can go to this one website, Bar Talk, and do a search for, say, food or cuisine, and it'll give you all of the available resources that they have of databases, thesauri, taxonomies that contain the words food or cuisine or whatever your search terms are. And then you can go to those resources. So there's a resource, I think, in Spain that has a taste resource. And so you can look at how people in Spain, or how this organization in Spain classifies taste, how they name it, how they define it, how they structure it. And so it's just fascinating what you can find online if you do the search.
That's so cool. Are you a foodie?
I don't know if I would call myself a foodie because I have actually kind of slacked the past couple of years in cooking. I don't know. Some people have done way more cooking during the pandemic, but I've kind of slacked a little bit. But I do, I used to enter food contests when I was in New York, and I write papers on food, and I just eat a lot.
Yeah, like good food. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I did the sourdough trend. I actually let my starter die 2 months
Oh,
ago. I think finally I was like, I'm tired of feeding this thing. And it's done. So how like you don't do food stuff as your current job. Um, what kind of led you into doing what you do instead?
my first role as a kind of taxonomist digital asset manager was at the Food Network. And so that kind of combined my interest in not just information management because I'm a librarian, but also food. And so that kind of led me onto the path that I'm in today. And I kind of just follow the jobs. I've been traveling a lot, I've been doing a lot of consulting work. And so I've had the opportunity to work at a bunch of different companies that are definitely not food related, but taxonomy or dam related data management. And I really enjoy doing that. I am kind of anal about data. And so being able to help people structure their data, understand it, and make sense of it is something that I actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's so cool. So taxonomy. That's what we're here to talk about today. Officially not food, unfortunately. I kind of could just continue talking about food. But so for listeners who don't know, taxonomy in tech is basically the way that a site or platform organizes its data and makes it findable. So like for something like my portfolio site, for example, is super simple. There's not a lot of data. The taxonomy is very straightforward. But for a site like irs.gov or something like that, there's so much data. So it's a really complicated field of study. So, Michelle, how do you do it? How do you organize all of that data into something that makes sense for someone looking for it?
So one of the benefits I think that I've had with a lot of the jobs that I've worked at is that the people that work at the company that are not me are usually subject matter experts in the type of thing that we're trying to organize. And so I definitely utilize the people in the company that have that expertise because I could make a recommendation on how to structure data, say on cars, but I'm not a car expert. So I would definitely utilize anyone on the team that I could get help to kind of figure that out. But my first line of attack is really just getting a holistic view of all their data, which is one of the most unsexiest things I think a lot of people think about. Data is not necessarily what people want to do all day. There are some people who are data people and some people who are not. I am one of those people. And so if you give me a spreadsheet, I actually can get myself lost in it for a few hours. And so being able to kind of understand the data, if there's pieces missing, kind of trying to form a puzzle around it, and then working with those experts to formulate the best plan of action is how I kind of attack it.
I see. So basically, like what lays the thing that lays the groundwork of the work you're doing is spreadsheets full of information.
Yeah, we're never going to get rid of them.
Excel is here to stay. Is it Excel that you mostly use for
Yes.
that? Or do
Yeah, because every organization is different. Every client is different. So they may not have a taxonomy management software, a digital asset management system, a content management system. And so in order to get started, to really start understanding their data, one of the best things to do is start with spreadsheets to kind of start putting and compiling and organizing. So yeah.
after you have your spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of data, what do you do? Like you said, you can spend, hours just like in them and digging in them, but what do you do with it? Like if I were given a spreadsheet of data, I'd be like, yeah, that's a lot of data, but like how do you start organizing it?
There are typically categories of things or types of products or groupings of things that a company will have that you can start with. So say for cars, for example, there's makes and models. There's, do you have a certain transmission? Do you have a certain engine? And so you can start kind of grouping things into really big buckets and then starting to kind of not just create smaller subsections or categories for those buckets, but what sort of metadata is needed to help describe what those buckets are. So you can have a bucket for a car, but if you don't define it, if you don't have the right metadata for it, it could mean different things to different people. So organizing is definitely one way to start bucketing those things, but also that side metadata is also really important so that you don't have these categories that kind of just stand there. Nobody knows what they are. So defining them is really important too.
Cool. Speaking of definitions, I've heard these terms structured and unstructured data. Could you tell me what those mean?
Sure. So on a broad scale, structured data is something that is organized in a particular fashion. There is no one way to structure data. You can do it like for your example about websites. You could structure it in terms of classification for products. You could structure it in terms of tax types or, some sort of, legal definition for categories. Unstructured data is where there's really a mishmash of things that maybe there's one level of data. So there's no like subsections or subcategories. Unstructured data could include things that don't have definitions or that don't include the metadata that describes those categories to make it clear what they are. And structured data doesn't necessarily have to be strictly a taxonomy. It could be other things like an ontology, which is like another area of taxonomy work that includes things that are structured, but not necessarily limiting to a taxonomy, which is hierarchical typically, or a controlled vocabulary, which is like a set list of terms.
I guess how are they different? So like, are we looking at like different flavors of ice cream? Or are we looking at like ice cream versus pie?
Yes.
Pie or both?
So if you're thinking of, if someone is, I think if you're thinking unstructured data, that is a dump of data that maybe you can get from a database. So if you kind of have like the basic understanding of a database, it's kind of just tables and lists of things. If you export that out, you might get, an Excel spreadsheet of columns and rows and data all living all over the place. Structured data could be maybe rearranging that information in a way that makes a little bit more sense. So visually, that's kind of how my mind works is I look at tables, and if it's unstructured, maybe it's like a single list, but structured would be maybe more hierarchical. And it really depends on the data set. So food, ice cream versus pie versus cake versus pastry, whatever you're talking about. An unstructured set of data for those would be like a blanket list that says pie, blueberry, pastry, flour, in one list. And then a structured list would be, pastry, pies, cakes, blah, 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 whatever. And then like, if you move to the, what is this, right? If you move to the right, then you could see what all the metadata is associated with those. So blueberry is a filling or a flavor that you can have in some of these.
I mean, I assume it's preferable then to have structured data, or do you enjoy jumping into unstructured data and completely having free?
Well, so I guess for like money purposes, I like unstructured data because it gives me a job, so I can pull it up. But if I'm helping someone, a client or an organization, kind of help structure their data or make sense of their data, then one of the things that I'm kind of like snobby about is things like keywords and like free text fields where people can just add stuff willy-nilly. And so without any sort of structure around those types of fields, it's really hard to make data clean. And so as a user, if you're searching for something, you're going to find a mishmash of things that isn't really organized, or that may mean something to someone maybe 10 years ago, but may not be relevant today. And so making sure that lists are clean and tagged well makes searching just a million times easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. What part of this whole process, because I imagine, actually, first question, how long does this process typically take?
I think if there's a small amount of data, it shouldn't take very long. If you are maybe just upgrading an existing digital asset management system, it might not take as long. If you're creating a new digital asset management system and your organization has never used a digital asset management system, it could take a really long time to set up, depending on the amount of content that you're working with or the complexity of the assets. So if you just have images, it might be easier to just manage the metadata for those. But if you have images and video and documents and blah, 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 whatever else kind of content you may have. It might take longer to not just structure the information so that the assets can flow into that system cleanly, but also, do you manage them separately? Do images get the same metadata as video, as documents, as whatever else you have in there? And so it's kind of modeling all of that out beforehand. That might take a long time.
So I have a listener question that I'm going to read because I don't really understand it. But so given the importance of GraphQL and emerging technologies to federate data across the enterprise spectrum, how does what you do interact with that and feed into the process?
I think what we've talked about in the past, some of our colleagues we've talked about in the past, have been a lot of people thinking about taxonomy or ontologies or knowledge graphs or enterprise knowledge graphs. They want to start at the fly. And so the process is normally, it could vary by region, but it's really crawl, walk, run, fly, right? So you have to start with the crawl with your data. You have to start from somewhere, and then you can start walking and running and then flying. It's kind of like the unsexy part of it. You can't just start with flying. Your plane might crash. And so you need to start from the bottom to create that structured data, to start building those blocks to create the plane that you want to fly in. And so I think it's really important for a lot of those software companies, the applications that people are using to kind of federate this data, to understand that if you don't start with a good data analysis, a good structured data starting point, good taxonomies and good ontologies, then your knowledge graphs, your enterprise knowledge graphs, will not really make much sense. And so even though it will take a lot more time to lift, starting from that point and starting from the bottom up is really important. And I'm going to start talking about food again.
Okay.
One of the things that I have not been able to, I'm not an ontologist, and I definitely am not like a graph architect. I don't know what they're called, but essentially one of the benefits that I try to let people know about in terms of the food research that I was talking about earlier is there's tons of resources that you could take from, whether it's online resources, whether it's internal resources. And so things like, knowledge graph software can help utilize all of those bits and pieces of information from different sources and combine it into one place for you to study and for you to utilize. And so you can take that resource from Spain, you can take Getty information, you can take Library of Congress information and combine it into this thing that creates a knowledge graph that then builds up this robust information resource for you to do searches to find things that are related that you may not have known or been able to find are related, looking at them independently.
It's very similar to what you do in organizing data. But would we say you come in on the front end of that then?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely not. I have not been able to successfully create a knowledge graph yet. It's kind of what I've been hoping to do with the food research that I'm doing, because I talk the talk, but I haven't been able to walk the walk yet. But building taxonomies, control vocabularies, and structured data is definitely my specialty. So I'm the person kind of tilling the field.
So when you have a brand new project and a brand new client, and you're joining as the senior data specialist, taxonomist person, how do you approach it? How do you approach this new client?
I think I personally try to follow some basic outline for getting this stuff done. It really depends on the organization and the type of product that we're talking about. For the past few years, I've been working a lot with digital asset management in particular. And so I think it's one thing is an initial discovery phase. So discovery is absolutely required for projects like this. You need to understand their current state of data, what metadata they currently use, what systems they currently use. And so that is definitely, it has to be done. Like if it's not done, it's not going to be the best project. So definitely discovery is really important. and then really forming a relationship with the client or the organization or whoever you're working with so that you can be as collaborative as possible. I don't think creating something and then giving it to them is helpful because I'm basically giving them what I think they need, not necessarily what they need. And so forming relationships is really important too. And then getting them to sign off on stuff. Obviously, we need people to sign off on our work, but if they really don't understand it, if they can't play with it, if they can't test it, if they can't make sure that their process works, that they're comfortable doing it a certain way, then the project will fail. So I think those are three buckets that I think are pretty important.
Yeah. Do you often find that clients are really uncomfortable with data? And what does that mean?
So I guess uncomfortable could mean a bunch of different things. I did not define it. So yes. It could mean something as simple as so many different people work on, say, a digital asset management system that not every person or every team uses or touches it the same way. So maybe one team touches color, another team touches the photography information, another team touches the campaign information, and then another team like admins everything. And so maybe the campaign person who understands campaign information back and front doesn't really know what kind of color to put on something, and so it's really important to kind of get everyone in the same room on the same page for how to move forward, because a lot of it is just kind of collaborating and consolidating existing processes so that it creates efficiencies rather than continues with this kind of siloed work that sometimes companies are doing.
So when you have a bunch of different teams interacting with a data set, does that end up meaning that you have different taxonomies for the same data?
It could definitely mean that. Yeah. So
how do you work with that?
So in one case, say you have a client for a digital asset management system, they may have integrated systems in their company. So they have a DAM and maybe they have a CMS. And so they're managed by two different groups of people. Maybe the groups of people can access it and see it, but really they're two different systems. They're completely separate systems. In a CMS, maybe you have a drop-down selector for a person to add a tag for color on an asset. And in the DAM, the drop-down for color includes, black, white, green, red. But in the CMS, it doesn't include all those. Mm-hmm. And so since they're two separate systems, you can manage those content variables separately, but those content pieces, those assets will now have separate information. And so it's really consolidating all of that really helps make the data more understandable for the org.
Yeah. Do you find that there's any particular part of this whole process or stage in this that clients are like the least excited about doing across the board?
I don't think that it's the sign-off period that's scary, right? It's like once you're done finishing a model or coming up with a recommended structure for your data, whether it's DAM or CMS or taxonomy or whatever, it's that sign-off period where you're like, okay, this is what we're doing. You can't make any more changes. We're going to go to MVP, and then you're stuck with what we give you. Like, obviously that's not a good way to say it, but it's signing off on that that's really scary, because once that's done, they can't make any more changes until after they get the handoff, they get the keys to the car.
Why do they have to do a sign off? Why can't they just keep on iterating until kingdom come?
It's kind of like an agile process. There needs to be stages. And so if you can't finish one stage, you can't get onto the next stage. So that part where you're finishing off or you're signing off on any stage can be scary, because you're then going to have to iterate every time. And so for people who may not be familiar with this type of work or are new to DAM or taxonomy, it can be scary making those sign-off points to start and then make changes and see what might have went wrong or what they need to update or what they forgot, what we forgot. I mean, it's scary. It's going to be scary sometimes.
Before we wrap up, though, I do want to ask, do you have a $1 million app idea to share with our listeners?
So yes, I was talking about this with a colleague of mine recently, where The shirt that I'm wearing is actually a men's shirt, and there are men's clothes and women's clothes that shouldn't be men's clothes or women's clothes. And so I would love for there to be something that could help not just manufacturers, but customers find clothing that they actually want without having to look for men's clothes, women's clothes, unisex clothes, or a combination of.
Yeah, I would love to be able to just put in my measurements into something and have it come back with like everything that would fit me. And be able to search by like C patterns, like what you have on your shirt.
Yes. Everybody likes fishes.
So it's so true. It's so true. I'm building a sleeve slowly, but it's all like sea creatures.
Oh, nice.
Because I love.
I went to a marine sciences high school, so I'm kind of biased.
Michele, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope the listeners have learned a lot. So I appreciate you imparting knowledge. Before we go, do you have any final words of encouragement for everybody out there?
Yes. Don't be afraid of data.
All right. That's great. Thanks to Michele for sharing her thoughts with us, and thanks to you for listening to Zoodio. Please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And until we meet again, let's go be great.